I will be reading Plutarch, Roman Lives, and I'll be reading the section you wrote about Caesar, Julius Caesar, and basically his last war he fought within Rome. So here it goes. Once these civic matters had been taken care of, and Caesar had been made consul for the fourth time, he marched to Spain to fight Pompey's son. Despite their youth, they had assembled a remarkable, huge army, and they showed that they had what it takes, in terms of martial spirit, to deserve their position of leadership. In fact, they managed to put Caesar into an extremely dangerous situation. The decisive battle was fought near the city of Munda. When Caesar saw that his men were being driven back and were putting up feeble resistance, he ran here and there among the ranks and the weapons, calling out and asking his men why did they not just take him and hand him over to the boys, since this clearly would not bother them in the slightest. At last, after a lot of effort, he succeeded in driving the enemy back. Their losses numbered over 30,000, but 1,000 of his best men had been killed too. And as he was leaving the battlefield, he told his friends that although he had often fought victories, this was the first time he had fought for his life. This battle was fought and won on the day of the feast of Bacchus, which is exactly the day of which Pompey the Great is said to have gone out to war 4 years previously. As for Pompey's sons, the younger one escaped, but Decius brought in the head of the older one a few days after the battle. This was the last war Caesar fought, and the triumph that he celebrated as a result of it tried the Romans' tolerance to the absolute limit. This was not the case of his defeating foreign generals or barbarian kings. He had utterly destroyed the sons and families of a man who had been the greatest of the Romans until he met with his misfortune. And it was wrong of him to commemorate the catastrophic that had befallen his country with a triumph, and to take pride in actions whose only justification, in the eyes of gods and men, was that he had been left no choice in the matter. Besides, up until when he had never even sent a messenger or a letter back to Rome as a public acknowledgement of victory, he had won in the civil wars. He had always avoided enhancing his reputation in this way. However, the Romans bowed their heads before Caesar's good fortune and accepted the bridle, since autocracy was, from their point of view, a pleasant change after civil war and turmoil. They proclaimed him dictator for life. But when prominence is added to the unaccountability of tyranny is the result, and this is now what Caesar had. It was Cicero who first brought up in the Senate the idea that Caesar should have extra privileges. But what he was proposing was at least more or less human in scale. But then other senators started to compete with one another to add one privilege on to another, until they made the man offensive and repellent to even the most mild manner of observers because of the pretentious and extravagance of honor that were being voted to him. It is thought that Caesar's enemies were just as active in getting these measures passed as his flatterers, because they wanted to have as many grievances against him as possible and to be seen to have entirely plausible grounds for attacking him. Their problem was, in other respect, now that the civil war were over, Caesar's behavior was beyond reproach. In fact, it does not seem at all strange that they should have voted to build a sanctuary dedicated to clemency, in gratitude for his even-handed conduct of affairs. Many of those who had fought the mismatched cause of our system, but even this provoked complaints among those who resented Caesar's power and wanted to see him fail. At any rate, when someone happened to mention that Lyra was due to rise tomorrow, the orator Cicero apparently said, "Yes, by official decree, implying that this was another reform which people had been compelled to accept. But the most and life-threatening outbursts of hatred he met with the result of his lust for kingship, which first turned the masses against him and which provided those who had long been secretly working against him with their most plausible pretext for action. And yet the people were trying to arrange for Caesar to be elevated to this rank, spread and rumor throughout the city that the book seemed to indicate that the Parthians were vulnerable to a Roman army, which was led by a king, but otherwise unassailable. And once, when Caesar returned to the city from Alba, they went so far to greet him as king, which clearly did not go down at all well with the common people. Caesar therefore angrily said that his name was Caesar, not king. This met with no response whosoever and he continued on his way looking decidedly unhappy and discontent.